Okay, let's talk about what was probably the most unexpected ship in the Legendary Last Stand bundle, the Legendary Dhelan Warbird. So the Dhelan here is a fairly straightforward ship. It's a pilot warbird with a secondary intel seat, which means with intel, you're going to want to go with energy weapons, which means it's a pretty solid scatter volley build or beam overload. You could go with reroute reserves to weapons on this thing if you wanted to go with a really big haste build. I'm not a huge fan of single target builds, so I just went with good old scatter volley here on this thing because I'm just basic like that, I guess. But like I said, I don't like single target builds. It's not my jam. Now, I remember when this ship came out, I remember Spencer specifically pointed out how it was kind of a shame that they went with Intel on the second seat on this thing, just because Intel and Pilot is a fairly common pairing, especially with pilot ships. So it would have been nice to see them do something a little bit more interesting, mainly do like a command seat as the secondary instead, give you another option besides the Eagle to do some crazy torpedo build stuff there. Because right now the Eagle is the only ship that can take full advantage of the passives on its console, as well as some of the other perks of its starship trait. Because while the console is basically essential for torpedo builds nowadays, and the starship trait is also really good for it, in order to take full advantage of all the perks of both of those, you need a ship that has pilot maneuvers on it. But currently the only ship with pilot maneuvers and a full lieutenant commander command seat is the Eagle. So it would have been kind of nice to have that sort of playstyle in a Romulan flavor here, but instead they went with Intel on this thing, which I was a little annoyed about it at first when, after Spencer brought it up. I did like the idea of being able to do a Romulan-themed plasma torpedo build, but using all the Eagle stuff as well. That actually sounded really fun, but at the same time, I know me. I like energy weapon builds, so I'd probably end up defaulting to something like this 90% of the time, and I'd whip out the torpedo build every once in a while when I thought it was kind of funny, but most of the time I'd be flying this anyway. I don't know, I guess just for the sake of variety, I guess I think the pilot command combo would have been more interesting, but the pilot intel thing I think is just going to be more popular overall as a build type. That I feel like more people are going to be enjoying this setup more than anything else. Whereas torpedo builds, they're a bit more niche these days. Yeah, they are crazy powerhouses, but people want to fly something that's more reminiscent to what they saw in the shows, and that usually means energy weapons. And Intel is much better suited to energy weapons than Command is. Not that Command can't do energy weapon builds, but that's the nice thing about energy weapon builds. You can throw them on anything. It's just that Intel's going to have a bit more of an edge for energy weapon builds because it has OSS 3 on here, so you can get a really nice power buff for all your subsystems, including your weapons power. So you hit that there, and then your weapon power just goes way up. And that stacks with isomags if you're still using those. So here is a full breakdown of the Dhelan stats here. It's got a hull modifier of 1.175, a shield modifier of 1.05, which are fairly low, but that's to be expected. This is a pilot ship, so it's meant to be small, maneuverable, and fast, not necessarily tanky. Got a 5-2 weapons layout, which is exactly what you want on a ship like this. So it can be very forward-facing. It's something you can run a scatter volley build on very easily. You don't have to worry about having too many turrets in the back. You can go pretty heavy with the dual heavy cannons up in the front. Got 2 device slots, which is also typical of a pilot escort like this. The bridge officer seating is Commander Tactical / Pilot, Lieutenant Commander Engineering / Intel, Lieutenant Commander Universal, Lieutenant Tactical, and Ensign Universal. Which this is pretty solid bridge officer seating. Yeah, pilot isn't the best for things, but it does at least have an unconventional systems trigger and clean getaway. And if you really wanted to, you could go with reroute reserves to weapons as your firing mode. But most of the other pilot abilities I feel like are more useful in a PvP setting than they are in PvE. Lieutenant Commander can be a bit high for an engineering seat on an escort like this, but it at least shares that with the Intel seat. So that's not going to be a problem there. It's a little heavy in the tactical seating with having a commander tactical and a lieutenant level tactical, and the spec seating of the commander only being pilot, meaning you're probably going to be only using 1, maybe 2 of those abilities. So it's going to be a little heavy in tactical, but not overly so to the point that it's annoying. And then you got a good amount of universal seating to do whatever the heck you want in those. The console layout is 5 tactical, 4 engineering, and 2 science. It's got a base turn rate of 16 degrees per second, an impulse modifier of 0.2, and an inertia rating of 70, which are pretty high level movement stats, which is exactly what you would expect from a pilot ship like this. Power bonuses are plus 10 to weapon power and plus 10 to engine power, which again, pretty much what you would expect for a pilot escort like this. It can equip dual cannons. Obviously, it's an escort. It's got an experimental weapon slot, and it comes with its own experimental weapon, but it's the one off of the older version of the Tier 6 Dhelan, the experimental railgun, which I didn't even bother testing. Its stats haven't changed. It has not improved with age. It's not that great. Go with something else. Go with the hexa cannons or the experimental weapon off of the Gorn Hunter ship. Either one of those would be far superior. It's a Warbird, so it's got a singularity core. It's got a Romulan battle cloak. It's got the pilot maneuvers ship mechanic because it's a pilot ship. Of course it does. And it has the tactical Warbird mastery package, which gives buffs to accuracy, singularity gain, and singularity cooldown, weapon damage buff, and a buff to crit chance. Being a legendary ship, it also comes with the consoles from the previous versions of the Dhelan, which, again, much like the experimental weapon here, have not aged well in the current state of the game, so I probably wouldn't bother using them all that much. But if you want to see them, here is what they are. Sabotage probe launcher, it drains weapons power, it deals some electrical damage, and if it's detonated by the owner, it will cause some kinetic damage in a small 1 kilometer radius to any targets that are within that radius. Singularity inverter, this one will give you a little bit of energy weapon damage resistance for 30 seconds, some shield resistance for 30 seconds, and you will also gain 1 singularity charge per incoming hit, increasing with total damage when being attacked by directed energy for 30 seconds while this is active. And then it has a 1-minute recharge time because this is the old one off of, was it tier 2, tier 3? I can't remember which, but the old lower tier version of the Dhelan. If you're someone who really likes using the singularity core powers, that might be useful for you for the sake of building up charges, but at the same time, it's not going to be that much of a game changer. And then there's the console off of the old tier 6 version of the Dhelan, the railgun destabilizer module, which basically just deals some kinetic damage to an enemy target. It has a small radius of 1.5 kilometers, and upon the expiration of this console, if your HP is greater than 50%, it'll reduce the recharge time of this ability by 30 seconds, which that's kind of interesting, but if it did more damage, it would be more interesting, but as it is, it's kind of Might be interesting on a torpedo build because it is kinetic damage, which kind of goes back to the argument of this thing would have been more interesting with a command seat than an intel seat, but it is what it is. And then, of course, there's the experimental railgun, which I've already said is not that great, hasn't aged that well, but I'll put the tooltip up here just so you can see it for yourself. Now let's talk about the new starship trait off of this console, and that is parry and thrust. And if you saw my my initial first impression review of the bundle, I didn't really have high hopes for this starship trait, and after playing around with it, that's, been basically confirmed. All it does is give you a stack of some crit severity buffs that you will drain through really quickly every time you use your pilot maneuvers, evasive maneuvers, or brace for impact. And while you're consuming those stacks, you will also deal a bit of plasma damage to an enemy target. Sadly, that plasma damage really didn't add up to much. In the testing I did, it only did about 2 or 3k, which is really low, especially when you compare that to complex plasma fires over here, which consistently did like 40k during these same tests. So it's like the difference between the two is just kind of insane if you think about it. Yeah, you do get some crit severity along with parry and thrust, but you burn through that so quickly because you only get 5 stacks of this buff. So you hit it, you get 5 stacks of it, and then those will drain it while you're dealing energy weapon damage. So sure, you're going to have like 50% crit severity on that first shot that you make after activating those pilot maneuvers, but then your next shot's only going to have 40%, then 30, then 20, and then boom, they're gone. And that's likely why the plasma damage between parry and thrust and complex plasma fires is so different. It's because complex plasma fires stays up consistently as long as your firing mode is active, whereas parry and thrust only activates every time you activate one of your pilot maneuvers, which you can see there has like a cooldown of 8 seconds, and that's not counting the active time, so it's closer to 10 seconds there, which is the same as the stacks on top of there. And if you try to stack more of them by activating your pilot maneuvers and then evasive maneuvers or something like that, it just refreshes them. You can't go over that 10 stacks. So yeah, not an overly impressive trait, which honestly, it really wasn't that much of a surprise. If the crit severity stuck around for longer, like maybe if it was just like a consistent 50% crit severity for the entirety of the duration of this effect, maybe that would be a different story. But you just burn through that so quickly, and being in a position where activating your pilot maneuvers is going to actually be useful isn't always a guarantee in every TFO. So you got to be really mindful of consistently activating these movement abilities in order to maintain those stacks. And it's just the amount of concentration it takes to do that versus the amount of payoff you get for it is just not worth it. So ultimately, with the Legendary Dhelan here, it's an okay ship. There's nothing terribly special about this thing. Like, both the old and newer Starship trait on it really aren't that good. The console set on this thing is very old, very aged, not that good. Fortunately, the bridge officer seating is pretty solid on this thing. It's just not that interesting. And that's kind of the big thing about this ship, is that really the only interesting thing about it is the fact that it is a warbird, or rather the fact that it's a pilot warbird, because a couple people actually pointed this out during the first impressions review I was doing of this, is that the Legendary Dhelan is the first pilot warbird to be introduced to the game since the original pilot ships that were introduced way back in the day, like these things. Yeah, remember these old things? These were the first pilot warbirds to be introduced in the game, and these were the last ones too. I mean, I guess you could technically count the Day One ships as pilot warbirds, but they're not warbirds. They're Day One ships. They're meant to be kind of funny looking. So really, the Alcala, the Vandross, and the JL are, or the Jai, I don't know how to pronounce that. Anyway, these were like the first and last warbirds with pilot maneuvers to be introduced back then, and now that's finally changed with the Dhelan here. So I guess that is one thing making it kind of interesting, is that it's in a very limited number of pilot warbirds. It's just, I do think the command seat would have made it a bit more interesting to make it a little bit more viable for torpedo builds. Because again, this is a Romulan ship. You could kind of go for more of a plasma torpedo themed idea, which, you know, isn't going to be super meta, but it's funny. It's kind of amusing. You're probably going to blow yourself up a lot because those destructible torpedoes can blow up in your face and do damage to you. So you have to be kind of paying attention to what you're doing. But I mean, that's kind of where the pilot maneuvers come in too. So they'd be helpful for that sort of build. So it's, I don't know, while I do know that I kind of prefer the intel seat for the sort of build style I normally like to do, I just feel like it's kind of a shame that they didn't, you know, take a little bit more of a chance with this thing and give it a command seat just for the sake of making it a bit more interesting build-wise. So I guess in the end, my whole take on this ship, stats-wise at least, is that it's good, it's just not super interesting. Ultimately, the most interesting things about the Legendary Dhelan here is the fact that it is a Romulan ship, and the fact that it is designed to be a part of the TMP era. A new legendary Romulan ship is something I was kind of expecting to not see again after the release of the Legendary Valdor, because, you know, all the old canon Romulan ships had been done. Like, you know, the Legendary Talus is done. That's the old Romulan bird of prey, and then they also put on the skin from Star Trek Picard onto it too. So that's been done. The Legendary Dhelan has been done. The Legendary Mogai has been done, and there aren't really any more Romulan ships from the old shows or movies. I mean, there's the old scout ship and pilot ship, but both of those skins are on the Romulan version of the captain's yacht, which is, you know, it's a small craft. They're not going to make that into a tier 6 ship, let alone a legendary ship. So yeah, we were kind of out of Romulan ships. So unless they started dipping into the Romulan ships from the newer shows, like the Praetor and the Keith, which, I mean, I suppose they still could do, but like it's not something they've been doing a lot with the non-Federation ships for legendary ships. So seeing a Legendary Dhelan just feels like it kind of came out of nowhere, but I'm happy to see it. Honestly, it's nice to see a new Romulan ship, because, you know, I really love the Romulans. I love the Romulan aesthetic. They're my favorite aliens from Star Trek. So it's really nice to see a new warbird. And ultimately, the thing that makes this thing more interesting is that it is from an era where we never really get to see any other warbirds. I mean, there are no canon TMP era ships from the Romulans. We never get to see a Romulan ship in any of the old movies. In fact, we only get to see Romulan ships in 2 movies, Star Trek Nemesis and the 2009 movie. And honestly, the Narada, you can kind of question that one a little bit. So with this ship, it's really cool to see that they went to the trouble of developing a whole design language for the Romulans for this era, because yeah, there have been a lot of fan attempts, but they just kind of completely pulled this off themselves. And you know, that's one of the things I love to see Star Trek Online do from time to time, when they just, you know, take little bits and pieces from what we see in the shows and then just kind of make something completely new out of it. Because that's one of the really cool things about this ship, is that it totally fits within the design aesthetic. I could totally see this thing flying alongside the Burrell in the Constitution refit. It fits so well, and I really appreciate that. Like, you can really kind of see the whole thinking behind the design. Like the nacelles, they're very similar to the Federation style nacelles, but changed up to be a bit different to fit more with the rest of the design. But you know, it kind of calls back to the Talus, which had nacelles that were very similar to the original Constitution. So they're kind of continuing that thinking here on the Legendary Dhelan, which this skin specifically is called the Datra class. So yeah, they're kind of continuing that there. They didn't go full green with the hull because, you know, the Talus, it wasn't green, it was actually gray. But, you know, they added all this green paneling here, so you can kind of see like they're moving in that direction in this era. So we're kind of at a halfway point between the Talus and the D'Deridex in terms of like the shading of the hull, but we're still distinctly going with the whole bird motif because Warbird, it's Romulans. They of course we're going to be doing that. And then we get a little bit of flair of the original series by painting a big golden warbird on the bottom here, you know, instead of the original orange. So it's a little different, but it's still very much a callback to the original series design style, and I love that. So it's just this whole design language here I find to be very impressive, and I really wish we could see more of it. That's really what I'm hoping to see out of this whole thing, is that we're going to see more warbirds in this design style. Like, I'd love to see like the Talus or the Thray done in this design style. I feel like that would be really cool to see, but we know how it is with non-Federation ships. So I guess we'll just have to keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully this bundle sells well enough that they feel like it's worth their time to do it again. Anyway, enough obsessing over the Datra. I'll give you guys a look at the other skins on here. Here's the old the Dale class, the Dhelan, and the Hathos, which was meant to be a sort of a Riemann style version of this ship, which I always thought it was kind of a neat thing to do. Not that I'm a fan of the Riemann style of ship design. I just thought it was a neat thing to kind of give the Riemans, just to, you know, give Riemann players an option to have a ship that's not the Scimitar to you know, mess around with and have that design language. But yeah, you look at the Dhelan and the Dale here. I was never a fan of this design. I always thought it was kind of goofy looking. It never clicked with me, and you know, even when they released the Dale class later on, it never, I don't know, I always thought it was kind of funny looking, which is kind of why when they announced a Legendary Dhelan, I was like, ugh, really? This is the ship you're going to make a Legendary of? But then you look at this thing, I'm just like, no, yeah, that makes sense. This, because this is, I don't know, I'm very impressed with this design, and like I said, I would love to see more Romulan ships be made into this design language. So ultimately, with the Dhelan here, like it's a good ship. Like, it's a solid energy weapon build. If you like pilot ships, you're gonna like this one just fine. It's just, I feel like they didn't make it all that interesting stats wise. Like the starship trait isn't very good. Like, both starship traits aren't very good, either the new one or the original one. The console set on this thing isn't that impressive. It's very old, it's very dated. Same with the experimental weapon on this thing. The only really interesting thing about this ship is the space Barbie of it all. It's a Romulan Warbird, which over the past several years, we've only gotten a handful of Warbirds released into the game. And actually the last two were lockbox ships, the Praetor and the Keith. So again, it's nice to see one released as an account unlock. Oh, actually, I guess you could count that that Romulan Dyson ship there, but technically that wasn't even a Warbird because it didn't use a Singularity core. But yeah, ultimately with the ship, really the only interesting thing about it is the skin, the new Datra class, which it's a TMP-era Romulan Warbird in a totally new design language that Star Trek Online kind of came up with it itself, and that's cool. I really like that, and I want to see more of it on other Romulan ships. It's just, is that going to be worth $100 to you? Because that's the big thing about this, is that it comes in a legendary bundle that is $100. $100 when it's on sale. Normally it's like 130 at full price. So yeah, ultimately it's going to be up to you how much you like this ship. Honestly, I'm kind of digging it, but again, it's all because of the space Barbie of it all. It suits a playstyle that I like, but it's also a playstyle that I can get on a number of different ships as well, which is still why I'm kind of hung up on the fact that I kind of wish they had made that a command seat, but at the same time, I know I'm going to have plenty of fun in this anyway. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Legendary Dhelan. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, and while you're down there, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, hit the join button to become a member. Check out the affiliate links in the pinned comment. Check out the merch store down below. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. Any of these really help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Either way though, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.